Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. Today I'm going to actually be reading an excerpt from the book Chinese Martial Arts Training Manuals by Brian Kennedy and Elizabeth Goh. I highly recommend the book as a whole. He does a lot of myth busting in Chinese martial arts. This chapter in particular, chapter 6, I won't be reading it in its entirety, but it talks about mystical places like the Shaolin Temple and Wudang Mountain, and how most of our image from that comes from what was basically Chinese pop culture novels in the early part of the 20th century. Again, I recommend the book as a whole, but I will be reading some of this chapter. I'm going to be skipping around a little bit to what I consider the pertinent parts. He does reference some other works in this chapter. When he does, I will be putting that as a little annotation at the bottom of the screen. So keep an eye out for that, and let's get to it. The stock Shaolin myth runs something like this. Bodhidharma was an Indian Buddhist monk who brought Chan Buddhism to China and, after meeting with the Chinese emperor, settled in the Shaolin monastery. After residing there for a while, Bodhidharma became concerned about the weak physical state of the monks and created a form of exercise and a form of martial art. He instituted a mandatory training program for all the monks, which included both his exercise plan, known as the Muscle Change Classic, and his martial arts system, which of course became known as Shaolin Kung Fu. From these beginnings, the Shaolin Temple became the central hub of martial arts development and excellence in China. The skill of the Shaolin monks was known throughout the empire. Their reputation became such that eventually the evil Manchu emperor ordered the temple's destruction. The monks fought bravely, but the temple succumbed to flames and most of the monks were killed. Only a handful of monks escaped the conflagration and went on to spread the art of Shaolin Kung Fu to the good people of China. A solid 95% of that myth is clearly nonsense. It is easier to point out what is historically accurate. There was a Buddhist temple called Shaolin, and Bodhidharma did reside there for a period of time. Beyond that, the story has more to do with hype, propaganda, pulp journalism. Tang Hao devoted an entire book to debunking this particular bit of false history. The myth was largely created by two books. In his article, On Politically Correct Treatment of Myths in the Chinese Martial Arts, Hennig states, the origins of this myth cannot be traced back earlier than its appearance in the popular novel Travels of Lo Kan, written between 1904 and 1907, and there is no indication that it was ever part of an earlier oral tradition. The second book that popularized the Bodhidharma Shaolin Temple myth was Secrets of Shaolin Temple Boxing, written in 1915 by an unknown author. In his article titled The Chinese Martial Arts in Historical Perspective, Hennig writes of this book, both Tang Hao and Zhu Zedong exposed the book's lack of historicity, but unfortunately, it became popularly accepted as a key source of Chinese martial arts history enthusiasts, and its pernicious influence has permeated literature on the subject to this day. This is not to say that there was no training going on at the Shaolin Temple. There are a number of clear references on the historical record to Shaolin monks being asked, which often means conscripted, to fight for various Chinese emperors. This is not unusual. Buddhist temples were often large landowners, and continue to be even in modern-day Taiwan, and as such, they usually had some form of militia to guard their property. These militias were often called upon by the imperial government to fight alongside, or even in lieu of, the imperial Chinese army. The Shaolin Temple had fighting monks who made up the militia that guarded the temple's properties and other business interests. In that regard, the Shaolin Temple was no different than any other temple or town in China. In contrast to the Eastern myths and to the Western conception, which is largely the result of the Kung Fu television series, there is no evidence that the Shaolin Temple was a hotbed of martial arts training or development. The historical reality was more likely that most Shaolin monks learned whatever combat methods they knew from whatever time they had spent in the army or in village militias prior to becoming monks. To what extent the monks at the Shaolin Temple did train in martial arts, the bulk of their exercise time was most likely devoted to weapons training and group maneuvers such as marching, forming ranks, and other typical infantry drills. This would have been appropriate to the purpose of guarding the temple and the temple's landholdings, and holding one's own if called upon to serve the government. In all likelihood, the monks were more akin to the National Guardsmen or Army Reservists than to Rambo. What the Shaolin Temple was famous for was staff techniques. General Qi Guang, writing in 1561, mentions the Shaolin Temple and its staff fighting and techniques. General Qi thought highly enough of the Shaolin Temple staff work that he incorporated one of their set routines for the staff into his martial arts training manual. The myth of Wudang, often spelled Wutang, Mountain, and Zhang San Feng follows almost an identical pattern as the Shaolin Bodhidharma fable. The stock version goes like this. Zhang San Feng was a Taoist immortal who lived and practiced in the Wudang Mountain Taoist temples. He invented a series of internal exercises that he used to achieve immortality. He also invented Taiji Quan. Like the Bodhidharma myth, this one is about 95% nonsense. The historically verifiable part of it is that there was a Taoist adept named Zhang San Feng who lived in and around the Wudang Mountain. Whether he achieved Taoist immortality, I will leave to the philosophers, but I personally would not bet money on it. As for him having invented Taiji Quan, that claim simply is not accurate. The early history of Taiji Quan has been fairly well documented, and its creation and development does not include any Taoist immortals, but rather soldiers, General Qi and others, and regular people, the Chen and Yang families. The major mythbusters in this one were, again, Tang Hao, writing in the 1930s, and Hennig, writing in the 1980s. There's actually quite a bit more to that chapter. He begins to go over the wuxia fables, basically. But I do think it is sort of refreshing that someone who understands history is really fighting back against these myths, tracing them back to their sources. I actually, a couple years ago, bought 2 scholarly books on the history of Shaolin. Eventually, I'm going to dig into them and make a video about separating what we can prove about history from a lot of the myth that has been spread. So again, if you guys found that interesting, please let me know. I'd be interested in hearing your feedback. Again, it's a book I highly recommend if you are interested in sort of the myth busting of Chinese martial arts. What the training was really like, who the average martial artist at the time was, historically speaking. What are your thoughts about Shaolin and Wudang? Let me know. And if you'd like to support the channel, or if you have any suggestions for any other videos I do, I'm going to leave a link to my Ko-fi account in the description. Please donate to that if you feel like it. And if you like my content, please like, share, and subscribe. Do the YouTube stuff. And I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.